there's a point where learning the game has a detriment to my fun of the game. All right, welcome to this edition of DM Roundtable, the show where a bunch of us D&D YouTubers actually get together because we like to talk about D&D together.
Hi, my name is Fred Weller. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. I talk about Dungeons & Dragons, other RPGs, a lot of 5e.
Hi, my name is Denny Dicely. I run the Dicely D&D YouTube channel as well as run a actual play campaign over on Twitch.
Hey folks, Wally DM here, and I have a YouTube channel that focuses on puzzles and traps.
Thanks everyone for joining me. So today's first question is, if you and the game's rules were in a relationship on Facebook, how would you define the relationship? Complicated, open, friends, married? Or in other words, let's talk about our relationships with rules when we're participating as DMs and when we're participating as players.
The relationship for me is complicated. I've run a YouTube channel and primarily a lot of the stuff was about the basic rules initially, and then a lot of Dungeon Master advice and a lot of player advice, so it's not a normal relationship, frankly. I would say for me as a Dungeon Master, I am constantly filling in gaps for 5e, but you're going to do that with any game, particularly when it's a bit more nebulous and a bit more abstract and not everything is sort of locked down, which is fine. I would say as a player, there are times when I think maybe there are too many, but then again, I'm not too sure if I'm divorcing myself enough from being a Dungeon Master. Frankly, I think the 5e rule system was simpler back in 2014. Not as simple as I would wanted. I actually wanted it to be much more simpler than that. I know people find that hard to imagine. I've always had a difficult relationship with something that I wasn't quite happy with. I was part of the alpha play test and the beta test for D&D Next, and yes, my name is in the monster manual, so I actually got conned into getting involved in all that as well. So it's really, really complicated for me. I like that the rules are simple enough that a lot more people are playing the game. For me, it's not enough people. I know Wizards of the Coast done really well with that, but for me, it's like, whether I'm a Dungeon Master or a player, I'm like, there's still not enough people playing the game. We still haven't managed to figure out how to get the game to a point where parents can play with their 5-year-olds. Like, what are you doing? Come on, guys, get it together. That's where we need to be. So I get annoyed about that. I get annoyed that we were promised 3 engines by Mike Mills, and we got two engines. Got the standard game and the variant rules that you attack on. A lot of people don't remember this. I know this because Mike Mills, when he was around, was foolish enough to talk to pretty much anybody on Twitter, and you could have a conversation with Mike and wind up stuck in a playtest for the alpha playtest if you weren't careful. So these things happen. So he was actually very approachable. So, and he had said openly 3 engines, but we never got those 3 engines, which was a bugger. So I'm still miffed that they haven't done that. I haven't seen anything to suggest they're going to do that now. I am so sick of talking about Dungeons and Dragons rules. So as a player, when I'm playing the game and somebody else is dungeon mastering and they do something that's different to what I would do, I don't care. I just don't care. I like, okay. If they ask me, I'm like, oh, well, I've done it this way before, but you could do it a different way if you wanted. I don't really care. That's sort of my approach. And then as a dungeon master, I'll do it a particular way, and then I might change it sometimes depending on whether it's working for me or not. So I haven't tried to change too much if I can help it, only when I'm absolutely desperate. I feel like the Dungeons and Dragons 5e classes were always fairly complicated when it first came out, and they're just a sodding mess now. I couldn't say how. It takes me right back to 4E and 3.5, and I'm like, oh, good Lord, where are we? Yeah, come on, guys. I know you've decided to adopt that marketing plan again, and we're going to do that design philosophy. Design philosophy has all changed now, so I guess that's how I feel about that. But there's a lot of lost material in 5E where things that we used to have in the game like just didn't translate into it. I was looking at strongholds in the Dungeon Master Guide yesterday. It's a paragraph, or is it 2 paragraphs? And I was like, you've got to be kidding. You have got to be kidding. They thought that was enough. And I was like, oh, okay. So like that's half the game. That's like level 10 to 20, easy peasy, strongholds. But anyway, so that's that part. And then I guess the game for me is starting to look like 3.5 and 4E. And I know a lot of people don't recognize that because they never played those games. I'm just frustrated at this point, which is why I've decided rules aren't something I really want to talk about, even though I talked about like silvery barbs today in a live stream. I'm going to go and talk about monster lore, I think, maybe seems more fun to me.
For one thing, it's hard to take off that DM hat sometimes and not be a backseat DM. When you're familiar with the rules or you've DM'd a lot and you're a player, it can be difficult to let that go. Just like a bad relationship. You have the relationship and you just can't let it go. So I can see what you're saying, it being complicated. And to anyone who doesn't know what Fred's talking about with strongholds being half the game, he's talking about some older editions of D&D where high-level play was running strongholds and managing followers and guilds, mage towers, all those sorts of things. So it would be interesting to see more of that, and I think that's one reason Matt Colville was very successful with the Strongholds and Followers Kickstarter and book that he did. Is that was a gap from the old games that people enjoy, and he capitalized on that gap. Conspiracy theory, maybe 5e left that open for Matt Colville to fill it. I don't know. So great answer, Fred. I enjoyed it. Denny, what are your thoughts on it?
All right, now I'm going to be the one to stir the pot here. So my social media relationship with the rules is married, but I want to preface this because that can immediately make people jump to like, oh, is he a rules lawyer? It's a healthy marriage. It is. And this might be because I believe I'm one of the youngest in this chat, and likely in a lot of these DM chats that we have that get organized. I have played 4E. I've read some 3.5E stuff, and when 5th edition came out, I began to become very familiar with it, though I wasn't part of any playtesting or anything like that. So I had no idea about these hopes and dreams of what it could have been. I've really only got what it is and has become. And I'm going to start with, as a player, I recognize that the rules are the base guidelines. When anybody who is new is coming into the game, you read these rules and they'll have the same understanding of how the game operates as I do. So it's this understanding of communication that I kind of take to be this marriage of myself to the rules. In many of the games I have played, because I've gotten so familiar with the base rules over the years, I've played with plenty of new player groups, and usually new DMs will refer to me, but I recognize, similar to what we were just talking about with Fred, that when I'm a player, I don't put myself out there as I'm going to be the one to referee this. I'm more there as a resource if you want to use me. If not, I recognize that you can make any ruling you'd like, because the Dungeon Master's the one who makes the rules in the end. And we just play the game that Dungeon Master runs, because not every D&D game is going to feel the same. As a Game Master, I know the rules well enough that I can begin to bend and add some excitement to the rules after many years of what has kind of become a bit stale, because we have gotten so used to what the system is. Like adding some homebrew, some house rules, extra customization, almost to the point where a D&D becomes a little unrecognizable, which it kind of even is in terms of Wizards producing content. It's becoming very complex. There's a lot of new additions coming out. And unfortunately, I kind of buy into it. I like all these new things, but that's how they make their money, right? So as a game master, because I start with this baseline and I've gotten to know it, I can begin to throw the game out of whack, throw in CR monsters that would likely kill my players, but then I also let them become ultra powerful, and it becomes this constant back and forth grappling. But because I talk to my table before we even play that this is going to be what this game is about, that's where that healthy marriage comes in. And when you're making these kind of big changes to the rules, that communication is super important. And also talking about how to deal with rules discrepancies at the table. And I think that's where a lot of rules lawyers kind of become villainized, because did the table talk about how to handle if things feel weird with the base rules? Do you welcome your players to challenge you if they think a rule is not correct? Or do you table it and then check after the session? Or perhaps you just assign somebody to look it up while you continue to run the game. I'm pretty sure these are even points that they cover in the Dungeon Master's Guide. My points of a healthy D&D rules marriage are this. It's important to discuss the boundaries of the rules. I recognize that I need the rules to play the game, so I try my best to understand them. Understanding the rules allows me to bend them, to alter things without completely breaking the game, and if you want to break the game, communication with your table about the rules is important, as some players might not be interested in what you have concocted based on going, hey, want to play D&D? And it's just not that anymore.
Denny, I I love your answer, and you made it so when we get to my answer, I have to say a lot less. So you said you were afraid of stirring the pot, but I am. Praises. That was beautiful. Yeah. Question for you, Denny, a follow-up. Have you found that as you've been playing with more and more people, knowing the rules and being consistent is a big part of being able to play with people that weren't just like in your core group when you started? Because I've found that when the more I play with other people, the more it's important to understand the rules so I can ask questions like, oh, do you run it this way? If I play this kind of character, is it going to work the way I think? Those kind of questions. Have you found that at all? Not been a big deal? What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, I find if you understand things or you know the correct questions to ask, like, it all goes back to that communication. If you're able to ask the questions or understand how to talk about it, it clears up so much of the miscommunication that might happen, or so much of the confusion at the table, and what people might perceive as the table nightmares, so to say, like, oh, this table did this and therefore I had a bad time. We could talk about things to get over those before they even happen. That's great.
Yeah, I agree. And the more you do this, the easier it is to kind of kickstart things. Like, my brother started playing with me and my dad is the DM, and it was hard to figure out what he wanted to play, and so he said he wanted to be like a half orc, half gnome, and be a small, like, but just like carry a huge cleaver sort of thing. And so my brain goes, okay, so by the rules, a small creature has disadvantage with heavy weapons, but I just told my dad, don't worry about it. Treasure this time when we have a new player, when they don't know the rules, and just encourage them to do what they want to do, and we can kind of fill in the gaps. And it's so much more fun that way, because it's a treasured time when someone doesn't just know the D&D rules and the code and that sort of thing. Anyway, I digress, but yeah, I great answers, Denny. I appreciate your perspective. Wally, what do you think about the rules?
Well, it's definitely going to be hard to top both of those answers because they're both very, very good. With regards to my relationship status with the rules in Facebook terms, I would have to say that we are currently friends. Although I did stalk 5e rules for a little while when I was in a relationship with Pathfinder, and that did not end as well. Pathfinder rules and it was complicated. We were together for probably about a year, and it got really rough. I almost gave up. And then I seen 5e, and I just started Facebook stalking a little bit, and in the end we decided to be friends, which is good. But in seriousness, mainly because Pathfinder rules were way too much for me, and I just wanted to chill out and have a good time, and I found that with 5th edition. Now, as far as rules are concerned from a dungeon master perspective, I like to look them up on the spot. I don't live stream any games or anything like that, but I usually have a really good idea of where I can quickly find it. Now, if I think it's going to take a long time for me to figure out a ruling or something like that, then I'll just be like, hey, let's just run it this way and I'll get back to you. I think a lot of dungeon masters do that. But like, if a player says, is that my action or bonus action, I can usually Google it within a few seconds, or I can flip to the page in the player's handbook and have it covered. And I do that a lot just so that we kind of learn together, you know, the player and I, and we kind of just make that rule as we're there at the table and everything's taken care of in real time. As far as my friendship with the 5th edition rules, sometimes we don't always get along. I'm not afraid to admit, you know, sometimes we have disagreements. We pretty much agree a lot of the things on the player's handbook, but every once in a while, my friend will bring this book over. This is the Dungeon Master's Guide, and he's like, hey, do you want to try flanking? And I'm like, no, I told you before, I do not want to play with flanking. Put that away. We're just going to stay with the regular stuff. And that's the way I like to run my games, is I don't put a lot of optional rules in there. I do like to stay basically within the rule set, and I like to know them because I like to go to conventions. I do like to run a lot of games for different folks and have that continuity where, you know, I run the games the same every time. I go by the rules, that somebody that has a very good working knowledge of the rules can come play in my game because we know. And I'm definitely not a rules lawyer or anything like that. I like to know them. I like to know where they're at. Now, as a player, I do that just for myself. Like, if I'm building a character, I plan my character out like really far in advance. I mean, really, really far in advance. And if there's something like, I wonder if this will work together, then I will I will look that up, be like, well, at third level, if I take this, will this work with that? And I already have that rule set. And when I bring my character to the table, I've already planned everything. Or if we're in combat, I'm already planning out my turn to know. And if I am indecisive about a rule, then I just won't do that usually. And that's just the way that I like to play it, is I like to have, my own personal pride of knowing the rules and making sure that my character fits within the guidelines and then acts appropriately as far as that goes as well. Now, the other players and the DM, that's up to them, whatever, because I'm still just going to be over having a beer and playing my game. So if they do something with rules or want to do, yeah, I don't care. Whatever y'all want to do. As a player, I've got my own little niche. I'm over here, hey, I'm ready when it's my turn, and then I'll pass it when I'm done. So I hope that answers. I didn't mean to go too much into my personal life with the 5th edition rules. I hope, but I hope you understand, but that's all I got.
I'm glad you were willing to share that and that you're in a better place with your relationships now, Wally.
Thank you.
You're a beacon to us all.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Speaking of Pathfinder, when I was new to 5e, I just wanted to play more TTRPGs, and I found out our local game store didn't have Adventures League going, but it did have Pathfinder Society. And I had a friend who was big into Pathfinder before 5e. So I thought, well, I'm going to start going to that and just start picking it up. And I rolled up an Alchemist, and I just put like all my stats into one stat so I could just throw as many bombs as possible. And it was pretty fun, but man, game shops are rough because I went there like thinking I could make some friends. No one cared. They just cared about doing their 5-foot step and killing the enemy. No one cared who I was or if I was coming back the next week. And that was really hard. This isn't worth my time. I only went like 5 times. And so it was rough. And so 5e with my friends that I wasn't at a game shop with who cared, and it was actual fun, not just about rules and killing monsters. That was a big deal for me. I saw some nods. Was that all relatable?
Very
the game shop experience.
Not with the game shop experience so much as, so you kind of bring up a good point. I mean, some folks are really sticklers with the rules, like, hey, with that extra 5 foot, or they're very by the book or whatever. I think that's a little bit different than a working knowledge of the rules or wanting to stay within them. I still think that you can combine with creativity and spontaneity and things like that, and play a game knowing the rules, but still do cool stuff and have fun and not be one that's a stickler. But I have heard a lot of stuff like that with Adventures League as well. So.
And a reminder to anyone who's in a relationship, like an actual one, not like the metaphor we're using here. If you're in a relationship, you're married, you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and you're playing a TTRPG with them, do not tell them what to do on their turn. Don't take over their turn. There was a couple that used to come to that Pathfinder Society, and every week the guy was always just telling his wife, I believe, what to do on her turn. And I was always like, is she having fun? Like, this is a bad sign. I don't know. I don't know them or where they went, but that to me, that was a bad sign. So
you must really like him.
Yeah, I must really like him. To my answer, I would say I am in an open relationship with the rules. I know it very well. We get together often, and it's hot and heavy. No, just kidding. I like to know the rules, and I believe there's a lot of exploration that can be done, and it's fun because we can only play D&D so much, and so it's fun to have kind of like the theory crafting outside of like analyzing the rules. And I've heard some people say people have fun not playing the game, and it's like they play too, but on Mondays when they have had a long day at work, sometimes it's fun to just roll up a character for fun, and theory craft. So open relationship, and what does that mean? As a DM, I default to the rules like 99% of the time, unless I feel the need to depart from them for some reason or something's just really cool. But I always say so. I say the rules say it should happen this way, but this is how it's going to go down, and this is the correct way for this instance, And then players, I don't confuse them that, last time you did this, because I communicated it, like, the rule is usually this, here's what we're going to do, though, and it'll be more fun. I find that calling it out when I do that is really useful, so that no one goes, like you were saying, Denny, like, to another group, and they think they're playing D&D, but it's different, like, oh, when Jordan was my DM, it didn't go this way, why am I so confused? What else do I not know? So that sort of thing. So to me, as a DM, I believe it's important to at least know the rules and communicate to the players, especially teaching new players. As a player, I often might request a little wiggle room from the DM if I know I'm playing an idea that is like, let's call it suboptimal or a little bit wonky, just to like try to make something a little bit more feasible without just asking for the moon, you know. An example, I was playing a beast barbarian, and dual wielding with 2-weapon fighting in D&D 5e is usually considered weak because you can't do a great weapon master power attack or a sharpshooter power shot, that sort of thing. So I said, well, how can we make this better? So found a system online that we liked and we agreed on just to make it a little bit nicer. And then recently I was on a stream with Tabletop Bob, and I said, he's the DM, and I said I want to play a thief that is all about using fast hands to like toss acid and stuff on people, like that rule like no one uses for the thief, and just try to make the most of it. So then we had to figure out, okay, so how does an improvised attack work? Can a vial be treated as a dart so that it can be treated with dex instead of strength? And we had to like talk through that kind of stuff. So you can do some wonky things, but I expected nothing. It was all just a discussion to like see, how would this work? Will this be fun? That sort of thing. And I'm glad I did. It was a lot of fun. We actually started streaming that one last night. So as a player, I definitely know the rules, but I also like to think of other alternatives. I think that comes from when I was a kid and I was learning chess. There was a point where I noticed people who were experts in chess, like after the first move, they seemed like they just kind of knew how it was going to go. And if I ever got to that point in a game, I wouldn't have fun anymore. And I thought, there's a point where learning the game has a detriment to my fun of the game, if that makes sense. Like, it becomes too predictable or it's not explorative anymore. So when I theorycraft like a power build for 5e, it's just for fun, but usually when I actually play, it's something like in the middle or like playing something that I just haven't seen before. I digress, but open relationship with the rules, whether I'm a player or a DM, but those are the kind of different dynamics I go for.
Yeah, I think something you said, I'm not sure what it was, but it resonated with me to remember to mention the session 0 thing, and I think that goes without saying that you should definitely, for the rules that you are and are not going to allow in your game, that should be covered when you sit at the table for the first time. Or at least, I think you said something like, going forward, this isn't what we do, but going forward, this is how we're going to do it. So if you know some of those in advance, like with me, it's passive perception. I use it a little bit different than what's written in the book. Like, well, it says here I can just take my passive perception. I'm like, well, no, I'm actually just using your passive perception to give you hints if I see something that you should have a hint about, or to roll against the monster's stealth, you know. Being upfront with that session 0 or when you begin a game or campaign, I think is pretty important, especially some of the outliers like your flankings, or if you're building characters, like your feats and passive perceptions.
Yeah, which by the way, I don't like the flanking rules either. Fred, were you going to say something?
So I've run a lot of games in public areas and forums, game stores, conventions, stuff like that. I played Pathfinder for a while. And yes, I went to the Pathfinder Society, and unless you knew somebody in the Pathfinder Society, it was very hard. It was what I would say they were the crunchy people often, you know, where it was very much about building a character and doing it really optimally, and it just wasn't for me. Because frankly, when I was playing Pathfinder, eventually I gave up building characters, and I got one of my friends to build them all for me because it was just too painful. I would prefer to sit on tax. And then I also ran games for 4E, D&D Encounters. Now that environment, when you're playing it and you're running it, you've got to kind of stick to the rules, you know, because that's what people know. But the audience is much younger, so they're a lot more boisterous. There are a lot of kids involved when I was running those games, and there were more than enough players, and nobody wanted a dungeon master. So you kind of had to make it fun for the players to keep coming back. And when I was playing it in that environment, it's different again. Do you know what I mean? I think it depended on which group you were playing with in terms of the experience it would be and what they would do with the rules. Because you always find every group has got a slightly different sort of perspective of the rules. There'll be something in there that's not quite what you're used to. And then I would have to say, when I was the Adventurers League for basically New Zealand, running public games, I would say that the groups of people that got together were a mix of people who didn't care about the rules. That's why they were there, because 5e was quite simple, and they'd heard it was simple, and they thought, well, I can get into this. And so you do your best to make sure that you didn't present the rules. You just presented options and then told them when to roll a 20-sided dice. Like, that was it. And then there were other people who would come in and they would buy every book, which there was hardly any. And they would have their character pimped out, and try to figure out how to get a passive perception of 25 and an armor class of 30, various things like that. So yeah, I have to say, I found that the Pathfinder Society harder to play and feel like I was welcome, and then Dungeons and Dragons 5e easier, but there is a mix too. There were certain groups that was hard to get in. So yeah, it can be a sort of mixed bag. I have to say I'm much happier with just playing with my friends. Like, that's the best environment.
In case anyone thinks I was like slamming on Pathfinder, definitely not. I think they're a great game system and a great company. It was just my anecdotal evidence of more game shop, war gamer culture, more so than like a Pathfinder thing. Just happened to be Pathfinder.
And I can add on to that too. Like, the one time I went to a game shop, it was for D&D 5e, and unlike your situation, unfortunately, I was like, oh wow, these are some great players. Like, we're not really doing anything I really care about, because like I came in the middle of some story that the store's been running for like weeks, so I'm like, I'm really not invested. And this game master sure as heck is like, I'm just here for the paycheck. So I was like, I'm really not a fan of this game master, but these players, they're pretty cool. Unfortunately, I didn't ever go back again, but that was my experience with game store playing.
I think everyone should try the game store experience at least once. I think it's good for you. Builds character.
Builds character.
No pun intended.
I haven't done the game store experience yet, but with regards to Pathfinder, I also want to say that I do think it's a great system. For me, I just don't want to have to concentrate on that many rules. I mean, I would play it. I'd play it again. I enjoyed my time with it. But there was a few points where I was frustrated just because maybe I was trying to learn too much at once. Coming from, I haven't played in 15 years, and I was playing basic edition before that. So, but yeah, definitely nothing against Pathfinder. I also think it's a great system. I think it's fun, but I do like 5th edition being more laid back than it is. And even with newer players, like I just started running a game for my family, and 3 of them haven't played before. And I like the fact that I can take 5th edition and I slowly introduce rules to them. Like, we covered a lot in our first game, but the game I just played 2 days ago, I introduced them to attunement. They're like, okay, you all received magic items last time. Now I'd like to introduce you to this rule called attunement. And I explain it to them, and just kind of dipping our toes in and learning the rules as we go.
I think that's the way to do it. I've had friends, when they try to teach me a new board game, they try to teach it all to me. And I just say, I just got to start. I can't sit here for an hour, and I'll probably absorb like 5 minutes of what you say. Let's just start. Teach me as I go. I'm willing to be bad at it the first time. It's fine. I think that's totally true. And, Fred, you were talking about like playing with kids and like being accessible to kids. I'm glad you've had people on your channel who I've seen on Twitter before who do like library games or like kid games specifically. I want to teach my kids to play these sorts of games. I think it does build character, and it helps them with math. Like, it's a lot of things. I have an improv background, and so D&D is a great place to do that in a very structured way. I think it's really great for kids to do this sort of stuff. So I like that 5e can be a slow rollout, kind of like a video game where, Ocarina of Time Zelda, first you start with almost nothing. Oh, here's a new item. Now you go to a dungeon, you have all these options, Oh, now you have attunement, That's a great example where you can teach them as they have room to absorb it. I've heard people talk about kids loving video games more so than school, and it's not just because they're addicted to it or they're lazy, but because video games come at them at the pace they are ready for, and school is often just slow and it's not tailored to them, but video games is like at their level and their pace. And so I like it when a game like D&D 5e can do that for them too. I also look at other games like Dungeon World's got my attention recently because it sounds like it's a simple version to do dungeon crawling and that sort of thing. But yeah, I want a game that I can teach to my kids and slow roll out, like what you just described. So that's a big selling point for me. And when my kids are into that, maybe I'll go from open relationship to married to the rules. I don't know. Maybe it's time to come together for the kids or something. I don't know.
Just take it one day at a time. You'll be okay.
Also,
Thanks for the advice on the relationship.
I just want to say, I thought it was really cool that we all picked a different status.
Yeah. We did not coordinate that. We just came in blind. So
I was actually looking through and seeing what my options were. I was just like, what do I have to choose from?
let us know in the comments, what's your relationship status with D&D 5e's rules or the rules of any system you play? I'd love to hear, even if you have different perspectives on different games, maybe your relationship status changes, kind of like Wally's did. Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next question for this DM Roundtable. See ya.